Hello my friends, my name is Maltanan. Welcome to this exciting tutorial. Before we start, I would suggest that you grab a tasty beverage of your choice and maybe some snacks, because I think we're gonna be here for a while. We've got a lot to cover, so let's just take a look at the piece that we'll be creating today. As you can see, we've got a nice footage of a city skyline. We've got a 3D logo rising from the street. So obviously we have to do some 3D tracking, we have to do some 3D extrusions, and we're gonna be using a amazing plugin called Shapeshifter that allows us to create 3D shapes, even 3D morphing shapes. So very organic, using your 2D skills, no modeling skills required. And on top of that, we're gonna have to put that logo inside of that footage. So we're going to have to mask it out somehow. And we're gonna use something that I like to call a 3D alpha matte. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to thank artbeats.com for providing this footage. If you don't know who they are, just Google them up. They provide high quality stock footage for your projects. And this footage, for example, comes from Red Camera. This is 4K footage, so 5,500 pixels wide. So a pretty big file, really high quality. So I highly recommend their site to you. And with that said, I think we are ready to begin. So let's just start a new project. And I'm just going to import this file because the first thing we have to do is to track it in 3D. So I'm just going to put this inside of a new comp. I'm going to call this footage, and I'm going to change the resolution to HD, because that's the resolution we'll be working with in the end. So I've just changed the size of the composition. As you can see, this video file is huge. This is 100% size. So I have to shrink it down to match our comp size. And in order to do that, I'm just going to right click, choose transform and fit to comp. And that should take care of it. I've renamed the composition footage. This is something that I like to do when I use footage in my projects. I always put them in a separate composition, just in case I want to do some processing on it later on. If I would have this footage as a regular layer, as a regular clip in my composition, then I might find myself in a situation when I need to add some additional layers to do some corrections or whatever. So I just like to place this in a separate composition that I'm now going to use to create my final composition, or actually my match move composition. So the first step is to add the camera tracker, 3D camera tracker, and just let it analyze this footage in the background. Having that said, let's just move to another key thing in this tutorial, which is 3D shapes. So I'm going to create a new composition, same size, and we're going to do the most basic thing imaginable. So we're just going to do a 3D text. So let's just type in Shapeshifter like that. We can position it right in the center of our composition, and we can now apply Shapeshifter. And just like that, boom, after adding a camera, 50mm should do just fine. We can see that our shape has now gained 3D depth. And as you can see, this is really robust, really fast. Shapeshifter is totally, fully, and completely GPU accelerated, so you will see some nice performance using this. And just a reminder, this is a full HD comp. So right now you can see that this is a actual 3D extrusion, but it doesn't look really interesting at this point. So what can we do to fix that? Well, the first thing is to add some lights, of course. Since Shapeshifter is aware of our 3D camera, it is also aware of our lights. So adding a light should be a quick fix to make it look a little bit more interesting. And by the way, here's a cool trick to using lights. Right here I've used a parallel light, so it kind of simulates the sunlight. It doesn't matter where I place it, it's always shining in the same direction. However, what I like to do is to have multiple lights and have all the lights share the same point of interest or target, if you please. So I'm going just to duplicate this light, and I'm going to open up the point of interest parameter, and I'm just going to link it with expressions to this first master light. Let's just call this master light, or key light actually. Key light, this is going to be our fill light, and we're going to have another one which is going to be our backlight, a very classic 3 light setup. So right now I can just go ahead and move the lights the way I like to, just like this. This is our backlight. I can actually move this a little bit, maybe to the left like that. I can move the key light a little bit here, maybe, yeah, let's just move it here. I can reset the point of interest. I'm just gonna copy it, and while I move the light, I will just replace it like this. Okay, that looks way better. And I can now use this fill light and just move it here, and maybe a little bit to the bottom, and also maybe just push it over there. And let's just use our 3D camera to see how the lights are positioned. I think that's more or less okay. Maybe let's just move this light over here like so, and maybe let's just move it up. By the way, I don't really like working with After Effects lights. I just find them a little bit clunky. I know that's not a technical term, but however, I just don't like working with them too much, because, you know, if I want to position them really precisely, I usually have to go into the camera settings or into this view mode, and it just clutters the interface, and everything is just a little bit more messy. And that's why I came up with this very simple trick of sharing the point of interest. Therefore, I can just position the lights, you know, freely using my mouse without being really precise, and I know that they are always pointing at my point of interest, which in this case is this 3D text layer. So as you can see right now, it already looks more interesting, but we can do more than just that naturally. Let's just go ahead into the Shapeshifter layer and look through the parameters that we have here. We're not going to walk through all of them, we're just going to walk through the ones that we'll be using in this tutorial. So the first one is naturally the 3D extrusion, and as you can see, it only has one parameter called thickness. If we're going to change the thickness, our layer is going to expand in both directions, so it's going to go left and right when we do that. So as you can see, it grows in both directions. That's actually quite okay, because most of After Effects default settings are that the maybe let's call it anchor point in this case. Anchor points are placed in the middle of our comp. So this thickness point of interest, or thickness anchor point per se, is placed right in the middle of our 3D mesh. And that makes total sense. So having that done, we can move to the 3D transform. And here I would actually call the 3D transform 3D offsets, because all the parameters here are set to 0 with the exception of scale, and we can now offset our shape if we like to using those parameters. Usually we don't really want to touch those unless we are doing something really specific and we know that and we know what we're doing. So for now, I think these are pretty self-explanatory. We don't have to go very much into those. Next are material properties, and they work exactly the same as our 3D layer material properties, with the addition of reflectivity. We can have reflectivity from 100 to 0%. Right now we don't really see any reflections because there is nothing to be reflected in our shape, but we can fix that really quickly. Actually, yeah, let's maybe do that right now. So let's go back to our footage layer, and I'm going to use this to create a spherical reflection map. So I'm just gonna drag the footage to a make new comp button. See how easy that was? if I would use a regular clip, I will have to scale it down again and do all that stuff. And now I can just create new comps that match in length to my footage, which is pretty great. So let's just call this reflection map. And I'm actually going to use a still frame. So I'm going to pick one frame. I think this one looks quite nice. And here's a quick tip on doing reflection maps, spherical reflection maps to be precise. We can just simply apply the polar coordinates effect to our footage and change the type of conversion from rectangular to polar. Of course, this is a rectangular image, naturally, so we want to convert it to a polar, so in other words, spherical. As you can see, it warps around itself, and it creates a sphere when we bump it up to 100%. So the only thing left to do is to crop this composition to the size of the sphere. And a simple way to do that is simply go to composition settings and use the height as the width, and that should create a perfect square in which our sphere fits perfectly. Theoretically, we don't have to worry about those empty spaces, those transparent spaces at the corners. However, if you would like to be safe just in case, you can expand either by scaling this layer or using another trick, which I personally like. This is my personal favorite, which is called CC Lens. That's right. If we apply it like that, we can actually change the size of this, and as you can see, it kind of warps like that, and I think this is going to be just fine. Also, here's a cool trick. You can add a offset effect on top of that if you want to be really precise what gets reflected on our extruded text. And right now, if I edit this before everything else, I can now simply use this slider to control which parts are getting warped at which point. As you can see, it kind of loops. It's a very nice effect. We can also rotate it if we need to. However, let's just reset it for now. I just like to leave this effect just in case. So this is our reflection map. The one thing left to do is to just freeze frame. I think this is the frame that we're gonna be using. So we can leave it like that and go back to our comp 1. So right now, before we go into the displacement mapping, which is the most exciting feature of Shapeshifter, we can go to reflection mapping and just simply choose our reflection map that we can turn off, and just say that this is our reflection layer and that the reflection type is spherical, and right off the bat you can see what's happening here. Okay, that looks way better, way better. So that's Shapeshifter in a nutshell. Oh, of course, I'm sorry. The displacement mapping, the most exciting feature. Let's just go ahead and create a new solid, and let's just add a circle effect to it. Just like that, changing the blending mode to normal, adding a little bit of feather, and maybe expanding this and maybe feathering it out even more. And of course, we have to pre-comp it. So let's just call this displacement map. Just like that. I can turn it off again. I don't need to see it. And when we go to Shapeshifter, and when we choose the displacement mapping, and when we choose the displace layer, and when we choose the use layers RGB Luma, which is what I mostly use, we can bump up the displacement height. And as you can see, it actually warps just as our layer is telling it to. So the wider the pixels, the higher the displacement. So that is Shapeshifter in a nutshell. And let's just go ahead and work on our design, which of course I have prepared in advance, not to waste your time, but it's still going to be pretty exciting to show you what it's capable of. So I can get rid of this comp and the displacement map, and the no, I want to keep the reflection map. Maybe we'll need it later on. But I can get rid of those solids, I think. I don't need them. Okay. Is this analyzing in background? Oh, no, it's not. Doesn't matter, because we have a lot of things to cover anyway. So let's just bring on the design. Okay. I'm just importing the project, adding it on top of what we've got so far. And let's just go to the master comp. As you can see, this is the logo that you saw on my Facebook page. And as someone cleverly pointed out, this looks like it's made of bacon, and actually it is, because everything is better with bacon on it. So that's the actual logo. As you can see, this is a fully 3D logo, totally 3D with lights, with effects applied to it. If you look closely, you can see Trapcode's star glow showing up in some cases at some angles when we have a really bright spots. But anyway, let's just take a look at how this was created. First of all, we've got the logo texture, which is the layer that we've been displacing with logo displace. So first of all, let's take a look at the logo texture. There's nothing much to it, really. It's just a bunch of solid layers with masks applied to them. So let's just turn them off and take a look. This is the very basic layer. We've got a couple of masks here that make up the shape, and on top of that we've got a stroke effect that makes the outline. If I turn it off, this is basically how it looks. Not really interesting, right? But if we add the stroke, it looks a little bit more interesting. Yeah, go figure. On top of that, we've got the adjustment layer, which is bringing up a little bit of highlights. On top of that, we've got another layer which is darkening everything around it. As you can see, now we've got some nice shades of orange instead of this flat, cartoonish orange looking thing. And on top of that, as a last layer, we've got our layer with turbulent noise. We can actually maybe even overlay it or soft light it or do other stuff. Doesn't really matter. We've got total creative control over how this looks. And here's of course another layer with some masks just as a alpha matte to this turbulent noise layer. So that's pretty much it. And just as a reminder, this is how it looks. Pretty awesome, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the logo displace, because that's where the power of this project is. This is the design that makes this logo into a 3D object. So as you can see, we've got a bunch of layers here, quite a lot of layers, but actually we don't need so many. I just like to have so many layers in this particular case so that I can just simply turn on and off some of the effects and see how they change my design. So let's just go through it. I'm gonna turn everything off basically and just walk you through what's happening. As you can see, this is the shape that you've already seen. And by the way, I'm using the variable feather masking tool, which is a great way to do modeling for Shapeshifter. As you can already see, you don't really need to have any 3D modeling skills. You can actually use your 2D skills that you already have. And with After Effects CS6 and the variable feather masking, which you can find in here, you can create some nice soft transitions that add up together to create a nice and smooth looking extrusions. So this is the basic shape. On top of that, we've got the detailed S-curve. This is the shape that we are using. And on top of that, we've got a simple four color gradient or a ramp. We can just exchange those really quickly and really easily. As you can see, they create some points in which this will be a little bit less extruded. So we can already imagine how this will look like. Actually, you don't have to imagine, I can just show you. If we go here, you can already see how that would look with only those layers turned on. That is pretty sweet, right? You can see this is the little indent, maybe the smooth hills. Here's the hill, here's the valley, and this is this. These are the hills, and these are the valleys that we've got on our logo. Pretty darn cool. So on top of that, we've got the upper S-curve. Let's just take a look how the logo changed when we just added this one. I'm going to grab a really quick snapshot of this by using Shift F5, really cool shortcut, and turn this one off so we can switch back and forth. Take a look at this. This is without the detailed S-curve, and this is with. Okay, see how it changed? Really cool. So when we turn this one on, and the outline, and the other outline, and the lighting up of the whole logo, and then the darkening of everything else, we end up with our final logo. You can see at this point that we have a little bit of banding going on, but we can fix that easily with one adjustment layer and adding a little bit of blur on top of everything, so don't worry about it. And that's actually what those layers are here for. But not only that, right now, as you can see, this is just a simple shape, nothing is happening. However, I've got a couple of layers like this noise, which adds a little bit of noisiness to our 3D shape. On top of that, we've got the alpha layer, which is an adjustment layer, and we've got this layer, which is the noise overlay, which is a turbulent noise with linear wipe. We've got another adjustment layer which has turbulent displace, and then we've got the overall blurs, which has displacement maps and light sweeps and fast blurs on top of it. And all of these things are animated to create this. And now you can imagine how this whole thing will look like. Actually, again, you don't have to imagine, you can just watch this in action. Take a look. And by the way, again, this is rendering using OpenGL, so it's really fast. Just as a reminder, I'm tracking a 3D footage in the background, so the CPU is busy right now doing something else. So Shapeshifter renders using only GPU, which is really cool. And now just wait for this wave going through, which is the light sweep effect. And a linear wipe follows along and just turns off all the distortions, and the logo is revealed. There is no other plugin in After Effects that allows you to do the modeling using these techniques, using your 2D skills, and doing 3D morphing shapes in this manner. Really cool and really fast. So that's basically it. That's Shapeshifter in a nutshell. The cool thing to point out is that, of course, we can throw like adjustment layers and animate the parameters, but we can also animate the mask shapes as well. We can just go ahead and maybe play with the S-curve, add a couple of keyframes here, and everything is going to work out. So that is actually pretty great. And again, just as a reminder, on top of that, using the variable feathered mask to customize your shapes like that, and the transitions between all the layers is a really great design tool. Not only for Shapeshifter, but just in general. I just like to have the more designing power inside of one application, because if you ask me, going back and forth between Illustrator or Photoshop is just a waste of time. So I think that's it for the designing part and the Shapeshifter walkthrough. Let's just take a look if our match move has finished. Okay, so it seems like everything is in order, so we can just move on. So if you haven't used the 3D camera tracker yet, I have a pretty good tutorial on that subject, actually two. Both of them are available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/Moltanen, obviously. There's Studying 3D Camera Tracker, which is more advanced, and there's After Effects CS6 3D camera tracking, which also talks a little bit about extruding 3D shapes, using native After Effects CS6 features, and so on and so forth. So I highly recommend checking out both of those tutorials and studying. Since it's more advanced, it's also available on my website maltenan.com, so go check that out in either place. So let's just go back, and of course I will talk you through this really briefly without getting too much into details. As you can see, we've got our footage and we've got all of these crazy colorful dots, and those are 3D markers. They're actually in 3D space right now, even though we don't have any layers for those markers. They are provided by this plugin. So what we can do now is we can just simply select a bunch of them and maybe create a null object from them, or a text layer, or a bunch of null objects and text layers, and even solids. So as you can see, I've got 44 tracks selected, so I can create 44 solids and a camera. Crazy. The thing that I will do first of all is I will just create a camera. That's gonna be just fine. And I make sure that the average error is below or close to 0.5, which it is, so I'm pretty happy with the results. And I can now go ahead and place my 3D logo inside of this space. So before I do that, I think I'm gonna use two logos in this case. The first one that I've tried out with this example was just this black monolithic graphite kind of looking logo, which is something that I actually like. However, this completed design that we have in here is also pretty sweet. So basically I was trying to decide on one option or the other, and I ended up using both. So we're just gonna do that. So first of all, I'm going to create a new solid, and I'm going to make it in the size of the logo displace layer. So 940 by 640, sorry. So new solid, let's make it black, or actually very, very dark gray, something like that. Of course, let's just make it 940 by 640. That's important because the displacement is going to be as the same size as the layer, so there will be no squeezing or stretching involved. And I'm just going to go and simply apply Shapeshifter to this layer. And of course, I'm going to put the logo displace in here as well. I can turn it off. Again, I don't need to see it. And I'm going to put this Shapeshifter layer in here and apply my displacement mapping from the logo displace layer. I'm going to choose RGB Luma, and you can already see the logo over here. So let's just move back a little bit, and as you can see, it's also morphing like it did. Oh, it is so cool. So let's just extrude it a tiny bit, like so, and of course we need to add some lights to it. So let's just go ahead and do that. We can create a new light, again a parallel light. Let's just put it in here, and let's duplicate it once. Let's call this key light. This is going to be our fill light, and the fill light is going to be at the same place as the key light. At least their anchor points are going to be in the same place. So I'm just going to pick whip those two together, and now when I duplicate this one, it's already pick whipped with the first one. So I'm going to call this backlight, and I can now position them freely wherever I like. So for now, let's just solo this layer like that, and I'm going to add one additional camera on top of everything, so I can just orient the lights correctly without disturbing the keyframes or of the 3D tracked camera. So by doing that, okay, this is my logo, this is how it looks at this point. So key light, I think we can move this over here, and of course we should reset the point of interest so it stays in the same place. Okay, now the fill light is going to go over here, and I'm going to move this back just a little bit like that, maybe move it up like so, And the last one is our backlight. So the backlight should go to the back, obviously, and maybe a little bit lower. Okay, I think that looks pretty decent. I think we can decrease the 3D extrusion maybe down to 20 or maybe even 10, and then displace height maybe to 100. Okay, that looks interesting already. And we can play with the material properties because I want this to be a little bit more shiny. So let's just do this and decrease metal and increase shininess, and that should look just fine. Okay, that is pretty cool looking. Okay, great. And on top of that, we want to definitely add the reflection map. So instead of doing this with the precomp that we had here, we can actually use this city reflect PSD, which was created in the exact same way, but only using Photoshop. So we can actually use both. Or you know what? No, we are going to use the reflection map because of reasons. And the reasons are that we can still go ahead and just simply modify it if we need to. And that is something that is always a good option. So let's just go to our match move composition and move the reflection map over here. We can turn it off. We don't need to see it. Like this, and the footage, we want to see the footage, but we don't need to see the logo displays. Okay, that's fine. Go back to Shapeshifter and the reflection mapping and choose our reflection map just like that. And now we can just play with all the other options. Maybe diffuse, we can pump it up, and maybe shininess a little bit less. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks quite okay. However, I think I would lose a little bit of this noise on this layer. And the important thing, as you remember, we saw some banding when we were demonstrating how Shapeshifter works. The important thing is to work at least in 16 bits per channel, which I'm sure I forgot to turn on in this project. So let's just go back, and yes, right now, all the effects that are used to create this logo displace are 16 or 32 bits per channel. But since the project is in 8 bits per channel, we've got a little bit of banding. But when we turn this on, when we turn this up to 16 bits per channel, we should see an improvement. Let's see. Yes, looks way better. Okay. Okay, now that is nice. Very nice. Okay, so we have our logo design. I think that looks quite amazing. And the only thing left to do, actually, is to position it inside of our footage. So the way to do this is to simply go back to the footage, click on the 3D camera tracker. I can turn the Shapeshifter layer off for now. And I need to find a good point, a point from which I would like this to rise. So I'm just gonna go through the footage and look for some tracking markers that will show up. And I think that maybe this one or this one. This one looks like it's right on the street there. So I'm just gonna click it and right-click it and create null. So that is a 3D layer, and it should be positioned exactly where we want it, but it's not. Why is that? Let's just try it again. Maybe I messed up. Oh, of course, I'm sorry. We still have the additional camera that we don't need, so let's delete it. That is confusing sometimes, as you saw. So let's just click here, right-click, create null object, and the layer is exactly where we want it. I just love it when it happens correctly when I'm recording tutorials, because I don't make a fool out of myself. Okay, so this seems like it's actually there on the street, and the cool thing about this is that this is still relative to the camera. So as long as we don't just grab it and move it around like this, we can use XYZ arrows to reposition this null, taking care that we don't displace it totally, but we can still move it just a tiny bit, maybe over here. And it seems like it is somewhere over. I would like this to be right here, maybe. Okay, maybe a little bit lower. So it seems like it's just behind the building. Okay, that's good. That is good. Okay, great. So now we have this null. Let's just call this master null. Of course, again, we don't need to see it, but we can just leave it here. And now we need to put our shapeshifter there. So how do we do that? The little problem with 3D camera tracking and adding 3D objects later on is that even though they share the same 3D space, they are not being created at the same default positions. So the problem right now is that I would like this master null to behave like it's the origin of our 3D space, when in fact it's not. The origin of our 3D space is half of the composition width, half of the composition height, and 0 on the Z space. So taking that knowledge into the account, we can actually reposition our logo using, yes, the 3D transforms. So let's just go ahead and do that right now. As you can see, the logo does follow the camera, but it's totally on top of the city and it's closer to us, which is something that we do not want. So how do we go and do this? First of all, we're going to open up the position keyframes and we're going to do some very, very simple expressions. Let's just make some room here and say that the position X, I want it to be equal to the X of the null. And I want the Y to be equal to the Y of the null. And the Z, I want to be equal to the Z of the null. But that's not all, because still our 3D extruded shape from Shapeshifter is positioned relatively to the middle of our 3D world. So we need to subtract that value. So luckily this is very simple. We just type in minus this comp width divided by 2. So half of our comp width, and this comp height divided by 2. And this should position our logo exactly in the middle of our null object, which it did. So that's actually pretty awesome. Okay, so what we can do right now is to animate this. So we can, since this is all based on this master null, we can actually animate the null instead of animating the transforms or doing all other crazy stuff. So let's just go ahead and maybe rotate it a little bit. Let's just position it like that, and I think this is right at the middle of this building, correct? Okay, so now I can just rotate this on the Y, like so. See how the reflection map is actually reflecting the environment in which this logo is placed. Really cool look. So we can do this, and we can then animate this rotation, of course, as well. And on top of that, we can move this master null up. So while it's over here, it should only begin to show. So I'm going to move the logo displaced layer like so. And we are going to animate this null. So I'm going to just grab the position keyframes and just move it up. Let's just move it up to this point maybe. And over here it should also finish the rotation. So let's just do this, keyframe and 0 keyframe. Very cool. And that's pretty much it. The only thing left to do is to create this 3D alpha matte that I mentioned at the beginning. Actually, maybe, you know what, we could also scale it. So let's just tie all these scale parameters together. So the scaling is uniform. I'm gonna connect it to the X scale like this, and the Y scale to X like this. And now I can just go ahead from maybe 20% to 100% like that. Of course, add some easy ease keyframes at the end of this thing. Pretty simple. Twirl it up and let's see how it looks. Okay. That looks really nice. So let's go ahead and create this 3D alpha matte. The easiest way to mask this logo out would be simply by drawing some shapes on a solid layer and just animating them according to the footage. However, remember that we are masking out buildings that are actually already part of our 3D camera track. So instead of doing that manually, we can just go back to the footage, click on the 3D camera tracker, and just go ahead and choose some points that we have on the buildings and make our solids from that. So I'm just going to start selecting some points. It looks like these are right at the building. The more the better, but we have to make sure that they are somewhat on the same three-dimensional plane, because otherwise we're going to get some weird angles. Okay, that looks nice. I'm just going to decrease the target size so the size of the layer matches more or less our building. And now I'm just gonna right click it and choose create solid. I'm going to do the same thing with this building, like so, and create solid. And the last building over here, it's hard to say which direction this one is looking, but I assume that it's correct. Let's go ahead and create solid. And as you can see, these are already matching up with our footage. However, they are not exactly of the shape of the building. So how can we fix that? And I got a really great trick to do that. Let's just go ahead and create a new composition that is going to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. That is actually important because all the calculations we would have to do later on are going to be so easy that we can just do them mentally in our heads. So I'm going to create a new solid, 100 by 100, correct, click OK, and I'm going to use my script called multi-cuber, or aka box from layer. By the way, you can get this script at aescripts.com for a reduced price with this code that you can see on your screen right now till the end of 2012. However, while I'm recording this, I haven't really published this script yet, so just make sure to go to the website and see if it's already available. If it is, here's a discount code and you can get it. If not, just give it a few days and I'm sure it will be released shortly. So I'm just gonna click this button and click OK. I want a 100 depth of a cube, and right now I have a box, so basically a cube. If I add a camera, you can see that this is actually a three-dimensional cube. Nothing too fancy, however, very useful. And if you want to see why I think the After Effects world needs another box script, make sure to see if I already published it on aescripts.com, because I will have a nice explanation for that. Okay, so enough of shameless advertising. Let's just go back to the project. So I have my comp1, which is my building and check this out. I'm going to simply Alt drag this building on top of this layer with my 3D cube, which is not yet 3D, but we can easily fix that simply by choosing Collapse Transformations. And I'm sure we can already see where I'm going with this, because right now we can actually make use of the X, Y, and Z scaling parameters. So check this one out. I'm just going to unlink the uniform scaling, and I'm just going to match my cube with this building. So I'm just going to move it over here a tiny bit and scale it even more so. Okay, now going up. That seems right, and I can just extrude it back like that, and this should match up with my building perfectly. So right now I'm just gonna do the same thing with the other buildings. So I'm just gonna Alt drag it to this layer and click Collapse Transformations. It seems like this one is rotated a little bit, so I'm just going to correct this and do it like that. I think that's correct. And just do the same trick, just expand it like this, and maybe a little bit in the Z space. As you can see, it matches up and masks our building almost perfectly, but that is due to the rotation. So we can just do this and correct it even more and extrude it like that. So here's our 3D buildings. This is our 3D mat basically. So the last building to handle is this one. I'm just gonna do the same thing, Collapse Transformation, Scale, Unlink, and just expand it like that and like that. Here we've got a little bit of curve, so we can actually create multiple boxes, but I don't want to waste your time with that. This is just to demonstrate the principle. So once this is done, to be able to make this into a 3D mat, all we have to do is to simply precompose them into a new composition, and let's just call this 3D mat, and collapse it again. Since this is collapsed right now, it will still follow our 3D camera. So we can put this on top of our Shapeshifter layer and choose Alpha Matte Inverted, and take a look at what will happen right now. The logo is getting obscured with our buildings. Actually, we just animated it in such a way that we don't really need to obscure it. So let's just change that for a second. We can actually do it really simply just by dragging this logo displaced layer closer, and you will immediately see if we also move the keyframes that actually our logo is being obscured. So this is pretty awesome thing. Let's just move the Masternode keyframes as well. We can move only this one, so you can see that the logo is rising and it is hidden behind the building with no extra masks, animations, or anything like that. It really looks amazing, and it was very, very simple and quick to do. So assuming that this is finished, of course it's not in comparison to what I showed you at the beginning, but all other things are really simple, you know, like fading things out and putting a text layer on top of it, so we're not gonna get into that. The only other thing to do is to make a transition from this logo to this cool designed bacon looking logo. So to do that, the only thing we need to do is to duplicate this layer and just replace this gray solid with our logo texture. Take a look at this. By doing that, we have just replaced the texture, and the only thing to do now is to adjust a little bit of material properties, because right now we've got 100% reflectivity, so we don't really see the texture. But if we drop it down just enough to see the underlying texture, we've got our second logo, and now we can fade it in or use some linear wipes or whatever other solutions that we choose to. So I guess that's it for this tutorial, make sure to check out Shapeshifter. It's a really cool plugin, and while you're listening to me, you can watch me do some cool graphics just with the logo that can be used for a poster. I'm also using my simple camera rig, which you can find on my website, maltenan.com, and on aescripts.com when it's going to be published over there. And I think that's pretty much it. Again, my name is Maltenan. Thank you for watching. See you next time. And as always, happy After Effecting.